Lichéesh Yoo X Ye awayest quaha takde yakunahin. Wan qanin zadat yutuchtatan. Yakkoha. Yakkoha aya yidosak. Qal which itch aya ye natich. Ya yes talk ite kutan. Yes talk ite kuhan. Aqa wutusuku wasa atnanin. Ya ltekatwe yakkoha. Wan qanins ha'at khai dat yejetune. Wan qanins aya atwatua at ya ha'ani kag. Qadata tinach sahayati. Kute qayakkoha. Gwashwatusuku adat. Ye awe tlel ha guchtatlak. Hilha sakwaat. Gwashkiwe. Yikea yoxatini ya yagi. Gwashyayagi kute qa weishkalnik saqut qa shada hastushkalniki adadi jigachtune ye awe qadasa yitwasagu khatqiwusi kunchish chaguksa awe wa achtuasagu wuchin khasati. It's great to see everybody. Thank you. Wherever you're at, I'm glad that we are together. Today I thought we'd talk about weather a little bit and go back to our story. Maybe finish our story. We'll see. Saqut Khashada. And I was thinking as I came into the Zoom, Ati was talking about fall. So we say yes. That's how we say fall. You say yest kuaha. So it gets this letter T on it, which would mean the fall has arrived. The time for fall has arrived. Then you could say takde yakunehin. Winter is coming. And so when Game of Thrones was at its height of popularity, there were lots of folks who speak Tlingit and who watched it, and we would say takde yakunehin, because I'd always say winter is coming or something in the show. And we call them yakkoha. Yakkoha is seasons. And so they just go in the same order. Yes is the fall. Tak is the winter. Tak ite is the spring. And kutan is the summer. Tak is also a year. So you could say kuntak soishu satin. How many years have passed and I haven't seen you? So if you haven't seen someone in a long time. Sometimes in Tlingit, something will look a lot like a question, but it's actually a statement. So you could say kuntak sawe, how many years? But you could also say kuntak sawe, and then some kind of verb, and then people will say, okay, that's not a question, that's a statement. So Tlingit will do stuff like that. Like you could say wasa is usually asking a question, like wasa iyati, wasa iduasak. But you could say wasa wuke aya wekuig. How wonderful that kuig was. So it also can be a statement. So questions can be statements. And we'll practice how to do questions. We might do that after we do our story and weather. But if you understand the seasons and you understand the weather, then maybe you won't get wet and maybe you won't get cold. Like that's a big thing around here. It's like you just got to pay attention to that stuff. And then the tides is also really important. So the tide goes dak, dak or da would be the tide is up. And dak is the inland, so it's going up away from the water. And then you could say yan u sha, the tide went out. And so it flows up and melts out, flows up and melts out. That's the verb, those are the verbs that we use. Yan is the shore. We'll also do some things a little bit later. The community course is always fun because we're like, we just do a little everything because everybody's at different levels. And so usually if I'm teaching a course that just sort of meets once a week and has a steady crew, like this has a really amazing steady group of folks, but then there's new folks who come in, and so we can't always start at the beginning. And so we'll sort of got this path that we kind of take, but then we're going to jump around a little bit and say, oh, we got to look at this thing for a minute, got to look at this thing for a minute. And if you want to speak Tlingit, you're going to have to, I think, go at it for at least 2 to 4 hours a day if you really want to. If you just want to know about it, then you could go sort of like a couple hours, 2 to 4 hours a week or something. But the amount of time you've got to put in to really sort of grasp some of the concepts, because we only got 1 hour a week, so we'll go over some stuff. But then I want to make sure that you folks know there's lots of things that you can work on. So the verb for I am, if you were to say I am learning Tlingit, you would actually say, and I'll show you folks how to say this, Tlingitshtuchaltu. And so Tlingitshtuchaltu literally means I am teaching myself Tlingit. And I like to focus on this verb because the literal interpretation tells me a lot. And so I like to tell students, I'm always happy to help, but you are the one that has to teach it to yourself. Like we do this stuff, but then there's gotta be stuff that you work on. And as far as some students and some folks who just want to learn Tlingit, get a little lost. Like, well, what do I do next? And what do I do next? And so there's a few different roadmaps that are out there, and there's all these sort of trails that you can take to becoming a Tlingit speaker. The one that I would shine a light on is I'd say, okay, so you're going to learn how to make the sounds. There's going to be some that might be hard to make, and you're just going to sort of say, okay, I'll get those later. I'll keep working on them, we'll get them later. Then you're going to start filling up your boxes. So it's like there's these bentwood chests that you got to fill up with stuff. Asai, the names of things. What's this thing called? What's that thing called? What's this thing called? So you're just learning a bunch of nouns. And then Tlingit, the noun is just something's name. Then you're going to start figuring out what are these other boxes then. Okay, here's some verbs. We've got some adjectives. We've got some adverbs. We got some direction, location things. We got some little things that just link other things together. And you're going to start kind of figuring out what those things are. And then through a process of sort of, and everybody's different. Everybody's going to take a different path. But what I generally recommend is you start sort of figuring out some of the really highly useful things. While you're doing that, you're going to learn sets of phrases that I think really are just going to be these things that you kind of memorize. Siutakusatan, it's raining. Gleitakusatan, it's snowing. Kahwe achtuasagu, I want coffee. But then you got this achtuasagu, and you could change the noun. Kahwe achtuasagu, I want coffee. He nachtuasagu, I want water. Da nachtuasagu, I want money. So you got this achtuasagu, and now you could just put any noun in front of there, And if you get into appropriate Tlingit flirting, that achtuasagu you could put another pronoun in there to say I want you. And if the time is right and everybody's on board, then it's a good phrase to have as well. But so then you're going to start so you start filling these boxes. And then you got to put the language around yourself. So even studying Tlingit could involve, I like to listen to music while I do the dishes, or I like to listen to music while I go for a walk, or I like this podcast. And you could still like all those things, but you're going to have to fit Tlingit in there. That's going to be your job, is to fit that in there. And you could download a whole bunch of audio. We've got hundreds of hours of Tlingit. There's no shortage of Tlingit in terms of stuff you could listen to. But if you're kind of new to Tlingit, what I'd recommend is there's a number of recordings that we have where we also have the printed version of it. So you can listen to it and you can read along. You can read the translation, and now you've got the translation. Then you just keep listening to the same recording. And your brain will put together, and your spirit will put together a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of behind the scenes stuff that goes on in your mind and your body and your spirit. And then you start to understand the structure of the language. And some of this is logical things. Like, okay, is it, in English you'd say in, but here in Tlingit you'd say on. Like, you would say nadauk ka, it's on the table, but then you'd say guk a ka kasaha kahwe, pour some coffee onto this cup. You would say on, even though it's in, right? And so some of these things are going to be a little challenging. And then there's a few that are just also kind of different. Like you could say on the beach, but it depends on if you're on the beach or not. You could say in a building or house, but it depends on if you're in the building. What I mean by depends is there's two ways to say it. One if you're there and one if you're not. With the beach, there's actually multiple ways to say. It depends on if you're on the land, on the beach, or on the water, if it's the ocean. So sometimes you're understanding like some of these logical things, but other times you're trying to get the grammar. A tlingit verb changes an awful lot, but it is all predictable. Well, most of it. Almost all of it's predictable. We're going to run into quite a few puzzles where we'll just say, that's just how it is, and you have to accept it. And so you can't have any, toddler time where you're like, no, I can't accept that. So you're just going to have to deal with it. Sometimes when I'm teaching Tlingit at an advanced level, I'll just tease that we get these two big books, the Book of Rules and the Book of Exceptions. So we'll learn all these patterns, be like, except when it's this, and it's that, and it's that. So that's what I thought we'd do. But I'll just sort of ask the group, anything you've been thinking about, any questions? Okay. And just to continually re-emphasize, this is a place of safety. Language learning and use is a healing experience for all of us. Colonization makes victims out of everybody. Some people say they like to play the victim card, and I think that's someone who lacks compassion. So I've been thinking a lot about decolonization lately, and decolonization relinks humanity to compassion, and I think it's a necessary step, unless you want to be inhumane, which I guess goes somewhere else and do that, like the moon. I don't know. Anyways.
Not the moon.
Okay, where? Like Mars? Go to Mars and grow potatoes.
I'm really glad you brought up colonization because you asked like, is there anything you guys are thinking about? And I'm like, do you really want to know? I went over to Alaska Day in Sitka, and yeah, that face says a lot. That's a lot for Indigenous people, especially myself being the first time there, to process. And not only that, but my background comes from Aangóon, and I'm getting a little emotional.
Go ahead, Juan.
So this time of year is October 26th is when the bombardment happened in Aangóon. And so I've been reading up on some different reports and stuff. And it's a lot, the colonization that you're talking about. I saw that the Secretary of Defense was in Cake yesterday, and they're talking about the bombardment of Cake. And they were supposed to go to Aangóon, but because Aangóon has so many cases, they called off that visit. So I don't know what I'm asking for, but I just figured I'd put that out there. That this time of year is really stirring up a lot for me, and I'm sure others.
Yeah, Lichéesh. Yeah, ach. You do a sock where yak Tlein ach. Yak Tlein has to come or cook. Ya has to ani. Yeah, Tlein we yak yikt who couch hit was oti. Tesla tinacha oti. Has to eat cool cow. Away. Has juta ataya has to ani. We anda unatin. Could the hinsa awa hasaw and has to ani. You could the dakwan. Ya has to an dachawe kehas luoguk. wasa ke hasu ik wasa has to tuta khona khoati. Ye awa kho ach Aangóon kaya iskalnig. Ye Tleinach ach shawat khatigit. Ach has lluguk. Would just yetich away. Just at kuch sati Kanach away ach kautle khait. Aqa away. Di tuasagu. Di tla. Kanach away. A kawadut. Di tla ka yedg. At ilqen. Tin. Tlellach toa oshku a kati se kagu. Wasa ha katas kawaha. Yag ha katas kausaha. Yag. A joy yagao. Aangóon datawe utachtan. Kakir. Kitchana ak. Wasa hasakawa ak has chulahihi. Has the hitki aya hasakausagang. At ayik ye wutin aya atu atcha. Jadasa has the Jadasa a atina hasyati. A joy kakachtu ak the katuhan. Wuchin aya kakachtu stugu. Ye awa hata wasaku hawunehi. Ye guk atank aya nak sati. Ya yidat jawasa hasakawa ak. Hajit raya hasawas edli. Jishukutlitsini tin aya kakachtu ak hatute aya gachtuti. Ha wuch tute aya gachtuti. Lichéesh. Yeah, I think stuff like this deserves talking about it, because these things have happened. The things that happened to us, the things that happened to those who are Tlingit. They really try, and the things that I've heard about and read about is ye'ewa wuchich yedal ye'ewa hatuati ye'ewa hakusti Tlein awe wuna I anikuk. Well, Tlechwuch udal ya yidat. A joy has to ideka kitishi. Has to jideka kiti aya datati nexa hasyati. So everything is in balance. Wuchach yidal is what we say. It's the same weight, it's the same importance. And if someone died on your land a long time ago, you're a steward of that land, which means you're a caretaker of all the people on the land. So it could be someone was out there and they fell down and something happened to them. You would still have an obligation to their clan, and you would meet that obligation. And this was just how we understand life to be. But I would say the government, and just the way an awful lot of white folks thought back in those times, the late 1800s, mid 1800s, was we don't owe you nothing. No matter what happens, we don't owe you nothing. Because colonization means the indigenous are not human. That's a huge part of colonization. You can't do this kind of stuff that we've seen in North America without dehumanizing the indigenous, which actually dehumanizes the colonizer. And it's a genetic, it's not a genetic thing, it's a lineal thing. Because you pass down this way of seeing through all these different ways things are encoded in language and in behavior. And so what happened was there was an icht, a medicine person, who died on a fishing boat. So they took this fishing boat and they said, "You guys gotta pay. That's a big life. You gotta pay." And they told them, they said what it was gonna take. And after a while they gave up. They said they don't understand. They don't understand how we live. They have no intention of doing so. So they let it go. They said, "Fine, whatever. Let's let it go." By the time the Navy showed up, and the Navy itself for Tlingit people, Ankatachtzin was my great-grandfather. His name was Bert Dennis. He used to say when the Navy showed up, that's when our women started washing up on the beaches, covered in seaweed and murdered. That's when they started to really wipe us out. So it's not a benign thing the U.S. Army. And that we have lots and lots of stories about these things, targeted attacks on our women. So they showed up, and there was someone on that boat. When a boat is really big, we call it on. So on is a town. It's a big boat. It's inhabited land. I think if you say ha'ani, the way it's explained to me by an elder was you're really saying our villages. Ha'atgi is our land. So Tóoch is the land, on is a village. So a canon is called Ānda So someone wrote on, they said, it's the situation has resolved itself sufficiently. We don't have to do anything. But despite that, that captain decided to bomb Aangóon. So they start blasting with these. I've seen one of these rounds. They would go, and they're pretty explosive rounds from what I understand. They found some in cake that hadn't detonated. The places that were bombed were Aangóon, Lichéesh, and Kitchener-Aq, which we would call Aangóon, cake, and Wrangell. And this stuff is so unknown, I think, that I was in the museum one time, and politicians apparently can just take stuff out of the Alaskan Museum to put in their office so that they can look super Alaskan. So sometimes they'll come in, politicians, when they get elected into office, especially governors and Congress people, like U.S. Congress folks, And so the museum, I've heard, off the record, even though we're recording this, will sometimes bring out stuff that they'll say, well, we'll be okay if this stuff leaves the museum. And they'll kind of maybe tuck some stuff away that they don't want to leave the museum. And there was a governor who's now the chancellor of the University of Alaska Anchorage who came in. And when the higher up people get in politics, the more they tend to just really are fascinated with war. They want to have war items in their office sometimes, And there was this unexploded round from these cannons that they shot. And this person who was going to be governor, or who was governor, I guess. So what's this? And they said, well, it's an unexploded round from when Cake was attacked. And he said, oh, by the Russians. And they were like, no, it was the Americans. It was the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy that did this. So it was documented that they didn't need to do this, and they did. And they started to blow up everything. And what you have to understand, like, we can go to the store, we can go to Costco, we can go to these places, but that you go back to the 1800s and those things aren't in existence. You certainly had trading posts and stuff, but people would work. There's this saying we say, a lazy person's going to starve in the winter, because you got to really work to put up food. You got to get that fish, cut that fish, smoke that fish, put it up so it's going to last through the whole winter. You got to go hunting. You got to, so much work. As we see right now, as the weather and everything's shifting, how we start moving into winter. And so they destroyed the food supply. They destroyed ʼadudli.átgi. ʼAdudli is in those houses. You can't replace this stuff. And I can only imagine how the people were running and screaming because they're getting killed off, and their whole village is going to get destroyed. And someone told me there was a woman and her son, and they made it to safety. And he's just a little boy. He's just scared, trying to hide in his mom's arms. And she said, you have to look. You have to watch. You can never forget what they have done to us. I want you to know and tell others what they are doing to us right now. Ha'ani kakaya hawati Ja'anawe hasaka ach has hashushahihi. Yaki ayati has to itikakedi hasati yuhan. Ajoyach to asukugi tu yeti hayukatangi hashkashniki. They really tried to wipe us out in a lot of different ways. A lot of things came after that as well. But there's this saying we have in Tlingit, hastu itik hasati. We're the seeds in the remains of our ancestors. And so Florence Shakely would say that to me sometimes. They'd say, hastu itik gati. Let your children be seeds in their remains. So all of us have this collective work to do. So one of the other things I said is no matter how hard they tried to wipe us out, either physically through bombardments, which were intended to destroy entire villages, no matter, I mean, there's a reason why I think people don't talk about this stuff. It's uncomfortable to just say, yeah, we tried to kill you guys off, but here you are, right? And then also through targeted efforts from churches and governments to absolutely annihilate indigenous languages. And so that's why it's important to sort of do workshops like this, but then also say, okay, I got to put in that same amount of strength and energy as this. The history is unbalanced. It doesn't, it's unbalanced. And so we got to put all this work and strength into this other side to bring this back to a language of use. Because if those people, some people tease us about being real mean, Tlingit people. I think, did we go to your town and friggin' blow it up? Did we go dig your people up and put them in a museum? And so, but some of these things, it's not as simple as like one side and the other, right? As we're all right here doing this work, trying to figure out how do we shift this thing so that these things are common and understood, and that these things, we can be human beings together, but that's going to require some reestablishment of some perspectives. And I think becoming multilingual certainly helps, because you can think about this stuff in Tlingit. And Lichéesh Tlein for bringing that up. And anything else any folks were thinking about? Hmm. Okay. We'll transition. There are maybe my computer was acting up, so I had to close everything right before I logged on. Let me find. There were some phrases I think that would be good for us to look at and just shift directions a little bit. And words of encouragement are good. The language has a lot of healing abilities and properties, and it's fun to be able to think about things in multiple languages at the same time. I think that helps with a lot of complicated stuff. Let's see. So I thought, since we're learning Tlingit here, let's do a few of these phrases. I've been going through some of these conversational phrases and pulling them from Tlingit Qinaqsa, and then also from some other sources, and just things that I think it's important to know how to say. So the way we'll do this, and I think what I'll do over the next week or so is take all the recordings of these sessions, and I'm going to put them on tlingitlanguage.com. I just got to, I'll probably just make a separate sort of tab for this. I don't know. I'll talk to some of the gang and see what folks think. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because we're going to go over each of these probably about 3 times each, maybe 4, maybe 2. We'll see how we're feeling. But in terms of we don't have enough time to do the amount of repetition needed for you to really internalize these phrases. So what I'm doing is I'm showing you, and then I'm handing them off to you to take care of them, which is a lot of responsibility, but we're in this together. The other thing, there's currently some discussions with UAS and our partners, AWARE, Tlingit and Haida, Global Heritage Foundation, Sealaska Heritage Institute, Sealaska Corporation, about developing what would basically be a full-time job to be the Tlingit language social coordinator. I don't know what else to call it, social coordinator. So what that person would do is coordinate study sessions and conversation times. And it's going to be a challenge because sometimes folks are going to want to show up and just speak in English the whole time. And sometimes we're going to try to use the language. It's going to be use times, study times, so that you don't have to be alone studying this language. You do have to do a lot of the work to put the language inside of your own self, but you don't have to do that work by yourself. And so I hope that makes sense. So we'll go over this, then there'll be a recording of this. You'll have chances to review it, to go over it again. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, there was kind of an anti-racism committee, I think, generally in Juneau about 5 years ago that was kind of informally started with Nami Erickson, and I was there. There were quite a few folks who were there, and we should probably, let's maybe set up some times to revisit that work and to figure out how to put something together, because things happen, and I think there's ways that people can skirt responsibility by altering what their intentions were. We gotta get back to business here. Okay. So we'll look at these phrases, and if you have questions about the phrases, you're curious about them, ask, interact with the language as you learn it. Okay, so you can see the English over here, so I'm not gonna really focus on that part too much. And I will show folks how to do a keyboard in Tlingit. There's keyboards for mobile devices, for Apple computers, and for Windows computers. Okay. I'll say it, you repeat. Yisikuge.
Yasikuge.
Yisikuge.
Yisikuge. Yisikuge.
Yisikuge. Yisikuge.
Yisikuge.
Yisikuge.
Khwasiku.
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 So as we switch from this form to a negative form, look at how it changes. Si turns to sa. Ku turns to ku. You have to pay attention to the vowels. Like the consonants always get people, like people think of it as like so many of them. Sometimes there's a whole bunch in a row, and this one's really hard to make. But the vowels really do a lot of how Tlingit should sound. So you got I, u, and you go to u. This is important. When you put clash in front of a verb, it goes negative, but now that verb must change. It just has to change. In English, you could say is not, or you could say will do it, won't do it, but the do it part doesn't really change. I heard it, I didn't hear it. It changes a little bit, right? So to say I don't know, clash khasaka. Clash khasaka. Clash khasaka. So, and also you have a high vowel, low, low, high. Clash khasaka.
Ausakuge.
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 Ausaku.
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 Clash awaska.
Ausaku.
Awaska.
Ausaku.
Clash awaska. Any questions about those ones?
What part of it is the verb?
Yeah, so for here the verb is yisaku, chasaku. For this one, this whole thing is the verb. And so, but it's kind of interesting the words that we use, because what I would probably say, this is the verb, but this is the verb phrase, which means you gotta have 'tlein in there because it pushes the verb negative, right? And so this one, so basically everything on here is part of the verb except for the ge. What the ge does is it turns something into a yes or no question. So you can make a yes or no question out of any phrase using ge. But even though it pops up at the end here, it's not always at the end of the sentence. When folks are learning Tlingit, they'll just put ge at the end of everything. But really this ge follows whatever the question is. So you might say, Hin ge ituwasagu. Do you want water? Or I might say, ituwagesagu hin. Is it water that you want? Right? And so, well, I guess, but you'll see it move around, right? So, eat ge yan uwaha. Are you hungry? But sometimes it is at the end of the sentence. Are you tired? But yeah, so, and then what is changing here is this one has a letter I. That sound is you are doing it. This one has cha. I am doing it. This one is unmarked. So here's something you're going to have to get used to with Tlingit verbs. To say who does the verb. If English used Tlingit grammar, it'd say I do it, you do it, does it. There's no pronoun for the third person subject. It just goes straight to the verb. For example, to say I'm sleeping, you're sleeping, they are sleeping, chata, ita, ta. It just goes straight to the verb root, right? And so there's a whole bunch with Tlingit verbs to study. They're very fun. They got lots of stuff going on. They change quite a bit. Okay, we'll probably do one more page, and we'll shift gears a little bit. So to talk about understanding Tlingit, the verbs now get a little bit long, and that's okay to have a long verb because you could learn what all these parts are. So this is me as an object. This is you as a subject. This is a classifier. Every Tlingit verb has a classifier. This has a grammar function and a logic function. So basically, the classifier appears right before the verb root. So the verb root that contains the meaning. Ach. It means to either hear something or to make a sound. It could be either of those things. The classifier is going to change what the verb does. So you could have this classifier, which we call the zero group, and that's to hear. If it changes to an S group, now it means to listen. If it changes to an L group, that means to play an instrument. And so you'll see that the classifier sometimes changes to affect meaning. Then within that group, it can change from usually one this way or that way to say didn't happen, did happen, didn't happen, did happen. And those are the big roles of the classifier. This sort of logic and meaning function, and then this grammar function to say did it happen or not. And that's what, and the classifier will usually tell you that. So here you have an object to whom the verb happens. That comes first. Me, you, classifier, here. This CH on a verb means habitually, like on a regular basis. And then we get the question marker again. So when we say this phrase, we say Chat iya achchike. Chat iya achchike. Chat iya achchike. Chat iya achchike.
Okay.
You know, there used to be those commercials, the guy walk around with his cell phone. They like he'd be Chat iya achchike. Can you hear? Is that what he said? That's what that's saying. It's like, can you hear me? Do you hear me? So to say, I hear you, I can hear you, I'm able to hear you. Ich a'ach. Ich a'ach. Ich a'ach. Ich a'ach. This set of verbs with hearing and understanding, they're interesting because it's like, it feels like an underlying X quiz, like just this whole set of things. And so like, chat is me as an object. Cha is me as a subject, I. So chat, so me, I, me, I. And then you have ach over here. So you're going like chat, cha, ach. And so you're sort of moving them around, right? Where the X is going. I can't hear you. Klesh ich wa ach. Klesh ich wa ach. Klesh ich wa ach. With all your days full of all these Zoom meetings, that's such a wonderful phrase. John, mute. Mute. So then we get a different, so this one has a ge in it. And it has an ach. And again, it means repeatedly hearing, right, at the base level. But then this one gets ch on the front, which is a mouth or an opening. So there's a few interesting things that languages do that I think about sometimes, which is like if you see someone and you know the English language and you're in a place where not a lot of people might know English, and if you saw someone you think, I'm having a hard time speaking the language of this place, so I will ask them if we happen to know the same language, and the verb you're probably going to use is, do you speak English? So you're going to use the word for speak. Like that's usually the verb, I think. I don't think, maybe I guess you could say, do you understand English? But it seems to me most people would say speak. It seems like the verb that folks would pick. So to ask someone if they, if you want to know if someone knows Tlingit, you would say this one, which is sort of like, so to the verb, are you able to hear the mouth of a human being? That's the way I think of it. Are you able to hear the mouth of a human being? But sometimes you can really overanalyze stuff. It does translate to, do you understand Tlingit? So here we go. We'll do this one word at a time. Tlingit. Ge. Iya ach. Iya ach. Tlingit ge. Iya ach. Tlingit ge. Iya ach. Tlingit ge. Iya ach. There was an elder who worked at Costco years ago, and he would check the receipt after you were sort of leaving. And I could tell he was Tlingit. That would have been my guess anyways. And I was always really friendly with him. He's friendly with me. And then I heard through a colleague of mine, he said, hey, you know that guy at Costco? He speaks Tlingit. I said, what? That's amazing. I'm always so happy when I hear that people speak Tlingit. And so I said, I'm going to ask him. I'm going to ask him this. And so I get excited when, and it's funny too. I get a couple fun stories with this one. So then the next time I went, and he was working there, and he was looking at my receipt and going down with this marker. And I didn't look at his face, so I said, and he stopped and he looked at me. And he looked back at this receipt and he said, which is a little bit, which is a funny answer to that question, because just to ask someone if they can understand the language, I think you kind of got to be really on your way to speaking, because it's kind of a hard thing to say. And what's also funny is sometimes I ran into this other elder, and we just started talking and visiting, and I thought, oh, I bet you she could speak. So I said, she goes, Tlein. And so I was like, oh, okay. And this other time I was with my kids, and we were at the Christmas bazaar when those things still happened, and we were eating food, and it was so busy there, and just sitting next to all these people, and it's very crowded. I talked to my kids in Tlingit, and someone said, "Do they understand? Is that Tlingit?" I was like, "Yeah." It's like, they understand. And I turned to my kid and I said, "Tlingit ʼadudli.átgi," and she said, "No, only Spanish." I was like, "Ah." And then we got in the car later, and she said, "I was just kidding, Dad." I was like, "Oh no, that was hilarious. It was amazing." So just you could say ah. You can also, we'll start with this one just in case you're feeling a little nervous. And it's not bragging to say that you do. Go ahead, if you're on the path, you're on your way. It's a wonderful thing to obtain being a speaker. But I think if you were using this language, even if you're just getting started learning, like you could say I speak Tlingit, even if it's just a little bit. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to acknowledge that and to say, I'm on this path and I'm trying. So one response, if you're feeling nervous, because you say, well, if I say yes, they're just going to, there's one elder, her name was Shuwateen, Martha Van Heel. Her and Lichéesh Aangóon used to come to Shkagwe and sell moccasins. And I knew one of them really well, Ida. Her name was Ida Kalmig, Lichéesh, which is wonderful. And I talked to her all the time in English and in Tlingit. And this other elder that was with her never said a word. And one day I said, and then she turned to me and she started speaking, like the floodgates just opened, and she spoke Tlingit so fast, and like she was real excited, and I just had to freeze my whole body so I could just focus, because I just wasn't used to her talking. And then it was really fun. She was asked to tell me who she was and who her people were, and where she's from, and where am I from, and who am I. And so it was really fun. But to say a little bit, because maybe you're afraid of the floodgates opening, you could say, Aye Gugink.
Aye Gugink.
Aye Gugink.
Aye
Aye Gugink.
Aye.
And here's an important thing. If you just say Ye Gugink, it's little. It's a non-living thing. Like it's a little thing. Like it's a little cup, or it's a little thing. Ye Gugink is little. But Aye Gugink is a little bit. So, I don't know if you've been drinking coffee all day and you don't want to be rude, but someone's like, you want some more coffee? Coffee gate to us to go. Oh, Aye Gugink. Aye Gugink. A little bit. But if it's early in the morning, you only have one cup. A kakasaka. Yeah, pour it on. Okay. And then I understand Tlingit. This will be the last one we'll do. Tlingit chacha achch. Tlingit chacha achch. Let's take a walk through this. So the first part. There's that. So you're going to make this sound while holding your breath. So if this sound is challenging, first of all, don't say I can't do it. Don't say I can't. Don't do that. It's okay. It's okay. Give yourself the room to learn. but you have to walk around sometimes. Take a deep breath and just make this sound a few times in a row. And you're just, if you have not made this sound on a regular basis, now you're trying to, I think the inside of your mouth is be like, wait, what? What are we doing? What on earth? You know, but it's going to be okay. But you got to train your body to do this, right? And you absolutely can. So after ah comes kha,
Ha.
kha,
Ah,
kha,
ah,
kha,
Ha.
kha.
Ha.
There's this common thing, like once you, I think, and folks are learning Tlingit, when you see this apostrophe, it's like, okay, here we go. But then you just put it on everything. So you have, it's like, don't settle down. It's okay. Ha, ha,
Ha.
achch, achch, achch,
ah,
achch.
ah,
Okay. And also watch those vowels. Uh, uh, See that? And just because sometimes like, I got to think about these consonants. I'm going to get this, but then you sort of overlook the vowels a little bit. Any questions about that? Okay. Yuck. Hey. So I don't think we'll get back into our story or weather this week, but we had some good things to talk about. I mean, they weren't good things, but they were things that we needed to talk about. But I do want to talk about a few resources while we're sort of starting to wind down. I've got a violin in the background if you hear. So this is clinkitlanguage.com. This is a blog that basically does a job. And the job that it does is it points to two areas, a Google folder and YouTube. So a whole bunch of classes, recordings of elders. There's going to be a whole bunch of lessons coming out pretty soon. Just little videos, like little lessons. And those are on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel that contains all of these videos. But the blog is here to sort of organize that information. There's a Google folder that has everything that I've collected and made for the Tlingit language, including every image that's in the beginning Tlingit workbook, every image that's used in every slideshow that I use to teach. And that stuff is freely available for folks to use. If you want to make flashcards, you want to make whatever you want to do, if it helps you study, go for it. It's all here. You just got you got to dig around a little bit. There's an introduction to Tlingit. Under learning Tlingit, I'll probably just create a new section here. There'll be a new page that I'll make, and I'll just put the recordings of these classes, these workshops, and also I'll put all the materials that we cover. That way, if you're watching the video, you can also download all the stuff and have it with you. Under curriculum, this one's probably needs a little bit of organization, but resources and curriculum are kind of the same thing. It's just sort of pointing at it in a different way. Resources is kind of organized by beginning, intermediate, and advanced. The new dictionary, if you're interested in that. Classic Tlingit texts, apps and keyboards, posters, audio, video, verbs, the Raven book, and place names. This is probably the most useful part. So if you're pretty new, you go here. If you've been doing this for a while, go here. If you've been doing this for quite a while, go here. And if you just want to look at everything, go ahead. Like everything is here. You could probably teach yourself Tlingit pretty far along just using the stuff that's here. Every class that I teach at the university is recorded and put onto this blog. It's linked to this blog. So if you go to apps and keyboards, this is where you can you could download keyboards so you could type in Tlingit. So the one that I use is called the Crippen keyboard. And so it's a little tricky to install. The steps are here. If you need help, reach out. We could try to help some folks. There needs to be a Tlingit technology office. The Cherokee have they have a language department, and there's a technology department in the language department. I was blown away. But I think we also need a Tlingit hotline. There's someone who sits next to a red phone, like an old school phone that sits on the cradle. And so you could just call them like, how you say this? How you say that? How you conjugate this verb? And we just pay people like really good money to just sit there and be on the Tlingit hotline. But until then, we'll just keep working with each other.
Can I just say one thing real quick, René, about the Crippen keyboard? If you have anything that's newer than Sierra on the Mac, you need to ensure that you actually unzip it on the Google Drive, then download it. Otherwise, it'll look like the files are completely okay to install and you will never get the keyboard to work. You'll get stuck in this loop. So unzip it first, then download it, or better do a file transfer from someone who's already unzipped the files. And this only applies to Sierra and newer. So if you have Sierra, Big Sur, and any of the updates. Lichéesh for the interruption.
Maybe I'll try and put links to the unzipped files right here, maybe at the end. Okay, Lichéesh. Yeah, I installed mine a long time ago, but I'll probably get a new computer at some point, and then I'll be stuck in the loop, so that helps me a lot. If you have a Windows keyboard, there's a Tlingit keyboard developed by Costin, Jill Meserve, and then there's Northwest Coast keyboards by Language Geek. So both of these keyboards do require an additional step. So if you're using the Crippen keyboard, you're going to hold down on the Option key while typing another letter. So once you hold down Option, it's almost like you're flipping the keyboard over to the Tlingit side. So then when you type a vowel, it's going to have the high tone mark. When you type an X or a G or a K, it's going to have the underline built into it. Now, when you have a built-in underline, which is better than the formatting underline, not all fonts are going to deal with that. Some fonts are just like, I don't know what to do, and you'll have this weird looking, like a box with an X through it, or you'll have a kind of an odd space, or it'll just look different than all your other pretty characters. It won't look nice. It'll just be this plain underlined K just coming out of nowhere. So check your fonts. There's a set of them that work really well. I use Indica New Basic. That's the font I use if I'm making stuff that's kind of for school age kids. Then for adults, I use a font called Brill. You got to go find both of them. One is Indica New Basic, you get from the SIL, which is the Summer Institute of Linguistics, and then Brill you get from Brill, the company. And you can use them. You can use them for free. If you publish something in Brill, you have to buy it from them. It's like $100 or something like that. There are other things. If you're using Google Sheets or Google Docs, I think some of the underlying characters don't work. It brings up shortcuts, and then you end up screaming at the Google Doc, decolonize your platform. But it's just there's some shortcut that they have. But most other programs, it seems to work pretty well. If you're trying to create like fancy memes and stuff or other things, Photoshop does not allow combined characters. I don't think Illustrator does either. So then what I usually do is I create a separate, I'll just copy and paste the text over itself, then I'll type a underscore, and then you can resize it and move it around. But if you're going to create stuff in there, it's a little bit more labor intensive. If you're using InDesign, it works, but then the shortcut key doesn't work from the Crippen keyboard. So with the Northwest Coast, I'm not exactly sure how Costin's keyboard works, but this one, you would type like a G, and then you would type a semicolon. I think it's, yeah, semicolon, and that will put the underline on the character behind it. And then you'll type the letter A, and you'll type a /, and that'll put the high tone mark on the letter behind it. Oh, okay. And yeah, there's quite a few fonts that work. They seem to be getting better. There's a number of fonts that don't work, so you might have to let go of your favorite font, but I think it's better than that font anyways. So. Okay, okay. I would say for this class, I'm happy to be here.
Your
Sorry, go ahead.
your daughter makes beautiful music.
Sheesh. She's first chair in the little ensemble, so
Wow.
it's very fun. And we've been doing this
Yay.
series of phrases and nouns for violin, which is called the one that creaks. And yeah, it's I know some folks don't have control of the fonts that they use. Like an organization might have a font, or the web page might have a font that's built in. I would personally say advocate for change, but sometimes you can't change those things. But then maybe you could talk to some of us, and we'll start a letter writing campaign. Say change your font and pick a font that's more inclusive of other languages. But some, if you got like comic book fonts and stuff, you end up hand drawing those, and it's annoying. Gonna cheese you, Han. Tlachunach ykei satini.
Lichéesh.
No, geez.
Lichéesh.
Lichéesh,
Lichéesh.
Granna, Iku.
And
Then quite cheesed in.